we're delighted this afternoon to be hosting Kim Samuel, who's here to talk about her new book, On Belonging, Finding Connection in an Age of Isolation. Kim is an activist and educator. Her focus for many years now has been helping to alleviate social isolation and improve the ability of people to connect with each other. To that end, she's worked with a number of organizations, among them the Special Olympics, the Foundation for Community Development, the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, and the Synergos Institute. Her work led her to being named a professor of practice in social connectedness at McGill University up in Canada, where she lives now, and where she developed a course in international studies on social isolation and connectedness. She's also been a visiting scholar at Oxford and 5 years ago founded the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness. It's a nonprofit research and advocacy group that she named after her dad. As Kim notes at the start of her book, while the world is more connected than ever, just in terms of technical ability, it nonetheless exists these days in an age of isolation, with increased political polarization and economic inequality contributing to our feelings of alienation, of disenfranchisement, of separation. The COVID pandemic, too, has aggravated our sense of distance from one another. And yet, the crises we're facing, whether it's healthcare or climate change or poverty, they all require a more united effort than ever before to overcome. And that's a central paradox, a major dilemma and dichotomy of our time. In her book, Kim offers a collection of stories and reflections on isolation, drawing on experiences, on literature, and conversations with a diverse array of people. She defines belonging in 4 dimensions: people, place, power, and purpose, and goes on to give many examples of what connection and community look like, pointing to ways in which we could build more inclusive communities and stronger relationships. Deeply committed as she is to the idea of belonging, Kim asserts that everyone has a right to being. That's a capital R, capital B, right to being. Not so much a formal legal right, but an integral element of what Kim calls a modern moral framework for inspiring and informing social movements. And she's been trying to build a global movement around this notion of a right to belonging. In conversation with Kim today will be a friend of hers, Tim Shriver, who is himself many things. He's an activist, an educator, film producer, entrepreneur, and author. As the third child of Eunice Shriver, who founded the Special Olympics, Tim now chairs this great athletic undertaking. He also co-founded and chairs a research organization that specializes in social and emotional learning. And he wrote the best-selling book, Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most. And more recently, he co-edited a book that came out about 1.5 years ago called The Call to Unite, Voices of Hope and Awakening. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Kim Samuel and Tim Shriver. Does it look like, Tim, does it look like your mic is on? Maybe I'll just push that.
This is on the bottom. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm the Tim part of the introduction, if you couldn't tell, and very grateful for all of you for being here, and most grateful to Kim for coming here to Washington, coming here to Politics and Prose, coming here to the headwaters of great bookstores and great opportunities to convene, great food, great hospitality, great belonging. This is a place where so many people, and Kim may talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, so many people have found in this place belonging, amongst books, amongst authors, amongst friends, belonging. So it's wonderful to have each of you here today, and thank you for coming out for Kim, and Kim, thank you for making the trip. I think it would be most fun, and I think of this as hopefully being fun, most fun just to start, Kim, by asking you to just give us a little background. We know your professional credentials, we've just heard them, but tell us a little bit about your family and your upbringing and what the markers were on your journey to wanting to write a book as important and as momentous as this one.
Thank you, Tim. The whole idea for this book came out of a moment and a memory that was seeing my dad after, I guess around the time that I met you, actually, in 1997, and he had a very serious brain injury and a coma for 3 months, and he woke up very, very slowly and had a lot of disabilities. And when he was at the rehabilitation hospital in Chicago, I kept seeing in my mind's eye a figure. Didn't really look like my dad. It represented him, sitting alone at the bottom of a well. And I came to realize that it wasn't the disabilities that he had that were creating this isolation. It was really the way that people were treating him differently because of the disabilities. And I got to thinking about people that are older. What's ageism? It's not because someone is older, it's because of the way they're treated because they are older, and so on and so forth. So it really felt to me at that time not as much, oh, I think I'll make this my life's work. That happened a few years later. It just struck me as an injustice, and it also was a source of some heartbreak, as you can imagine, as a daughter for her father, and also for my mother that was feeling the same. Well, that's where my book begins, but you asked about the journey. Well, if my parents were here today, they would say, tell them you had a really great childhood, and and I had a really great childhood. So I don't know if it was wiring or if it was just the personality I came in with. I was, unbeknownst to most people, a very shy kid and really insecure. So when people would see me laughing, it was a lot because I was nervous. And if I was looking down, it was because I was nervous. And if I was an overachiever in school, which I was, it was because I thought I better be good at something. And I certainly didn't have a word for that about feeling isolated. But when I look back many decades ago now, I can see that was exactly that. And much more recently, I went to McGill University to create this course. And at the beginning, I was terrified, having never taught before, but going back to being 9 years old, where at that point I was firmly decided on being a teacher and a nun. All of my teachers were nuns then. I didn't hold on to that one. And not even the teacher.
Not too late, not too late.
I thought it was great because the convent was right down the street from where I was living, and I can be with mom and dad forever and be a teacher. Anyway, the teacher part left me for a long time. And when I went to McGill University, I was thinking that, this is a really good strategic, pragmatic plan. I want to create this course. I want to teach it to show that it can be created and taught and to take it everywhere in the world. And I still feel that way. I just need a lot of professors and teachers to help me. What happened was I don't know if I've shared this with you, just a day or two before I went to teach my first class, which at that point was the most exciting and most frightening thing I'd ever done. I could feel 9-year-old me with her long braids that she was very proud of doing herself every day, kind of standing outside my body as, yeah, we did it. And of course, for the first 3 weeks of teaching, I was terrified. And after that, I realized that that's what I should have been doing my whole life. But about 5 weeks later, I was walking around the campus after hearing a lot of students coming in my very long and extended office hours. I found that was the best part of it all, talking about some of their own struggles. and it occurred to me that these were struggles that probably no one else could see. And I stopped one day and sat on a bench on campus, and I felt almost paralyzed and so sad. I thought, well, how can I be feeling so sad when this is such a time of joy? And I felt in that moment that I met my 21-year-old self at university in Toronto. And again, I was feeling very isolated. I'd go out jogging while it was still dark in the morning, because that kind of matched how I was feeling inside. Stay in shape, but be invisible. I did well in school again, and I was much more sociable. I'd learned how to not be so shy, and yet I was going through that again. So I thought, well, what a great opportunity to heal myself, but also never forget that you can feel this way anytime.
So, Kim, you I don't know if you want to, there's so many sections in the book that capture the experience that I think so many of us have, which is to say that if you went around this room right now, we could all probably easily bring to mind moments where we didn't feel included. School, 9-year-old Kim, 21-year-old Kim, Professor Kim, all had these moments. They feel like, life feels like a series of experiences to try to avoid feeling the lack of belonging, right? But you open the book with a description of a scene, a situation in which an archetypal leader in this space kind of shocked you. I don't know if you want to read the beginning sections or not. It's so beautiful, and people probably haven't had a chance to read it themselves yet. If you wanted to share that section.
I think I'll just share it this way, because I've already told you half of that section, which is about my father.
Yeah.
And I guess that the two seminal moments that led to what was probably in me for many decades before that moment. I just didn't know it before both moments. So in 2002, I was in New York City, and I was invited to a dinner, and it was in honor of Nelson Mandela and Gracia Machel. I had met Gracia Machel previously. For anyone who isn't aware, she was married to Nelson Mandela. She was the First Lady of South Africa, and before that, First Lady of Mozambique, and in her own right, an incredible leader and great inspiration to me, and she introduced me to her husband. And I was so, as you can imagine, so honored to meet him. And so honored that I couldn't think of anything to say at first. And she said, well, tell us, how are you doing since your daddy has passed, which had been 2 years earlier. And I said that, of course, that I missed him, and what I was working on now, and just the quickest things that came to my mind. And then I looked to Nelson Mandela, and I said, of course, you would know, you get to be Nelson Mandela for the next 10, 20 seconds. Of course, you would know all about isolation. And he said, no, I've never been isolated. And that already, when something, if a breeze or something kind of makes you go like that physically, well, this wasn't physical, but inside that's what I felt like. And I thought, how could I have gotten this moment so wrong? Yeah. But then I thought, well, no, try again. And I said, not even in Robben Island. And he said,
which is the prison where he
of
spent
course.
27 years of his life.
Yeah, well, and 19 of those years imprisonment were there. And not even in Robben Island. And he said, no, because in Robben Island, we were all brothers working together for a common purpose. I was never alone. And then I'll paraphrase in the interest of time, he then went on to say that he had seen isolation. He had seen isolation in the child in a village in Africa with AIDS, who had no one to love, to care for, to touch. I have seen isolation, and it is very bad. Well, that I want to explain, and I'm in the U.S. today. I lived actually 2 blocks from this bookshop, a big center of my belonging, in the 1990s. But here, we would look back at that moment and say, well, that was my 4th of July moment, right? That was fireworks and all these beautiful patterns in the sky. It wasn't like that at all. It was, for me, this really quiet affirmation in that moment of, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And I am.
There you go. So, Kim, one of the interesting points that you develop a little bit in the book, we've seen a lot of recently. I was at a conference. This is a surprise question, by the way. We just said we were going to talk, and you've just brought something to mind with the Robben Island example. I was at a conference a few days ago where one of the speakers was someone who had been in a white supremacist organization, a neo-Nazi organization, and had done quite horrible things. And had, for the last 10 years or 15 years, has been out and trying to, in effect, pay society and people back for this. But he described the joining of the organization as the search for belonging. He said that he was lured in when he was alone on a street corner smoking a cigarette in an alley by someone who came to him and said words that made him feel like he could trust and feel connected to people. So sometimes it seems like this desire, maybe this almost instinct, this craving for belonging can lead us in very dangerous directions, right?
Yeah.
Can you say anything about, as you read the book, were there surprises about, as you worked on the book, were there surprises that struck you about belonging, its function, and maybe sometimes even its not such great outcomes when people get distracted or...
Yeah. What you're talking about is what I call the shadow side of belonging. The desire is there, the need is there. What I advocate for is a birthright of belonging is all there. But any of us can easily be drawn into something that we may not even really truly believe in, and may not even question that we don't believe in it, because in that moment you feel that you're being welcomed in, and you are, and you're not, because that's not an authentic invitation to join a group based on hate. Belonging and hate could never go together. But it's also really important, that example that you're giving, and I give a similar example in the book about someone who had been raised in a white supremacist group. His father was a leader in that, and he went off to college, and he met a fellow student who was Jewish and invited him to Shabbat dinner on Friday night, and every Friday, and at first almost nobody would come, saying, how could you invite this hate monger so on here? And I would like to just pick up on the other side of what you're saying, because for every person that is drawn into this false belonging, there's a way that on one hand it's an individual thing, and on the other hand you're not alone. People set you up for that, including, another example would be recruitment for violent extremism for young people who just feel that they don't fit in, and that not fitting in goes a lot deeper than, hey, I went to a new school, or I'm Kim Samuel and I'm really shy. That has to do with a lot of systemic messages that person has picked up along the way. But the healing has to come also from the person who feels the belonging strongly enough, or is part of a community strongly enough, that can say, welcome in. And that, in this case, was a young man, and they became great friends, which I think is important, but not as important as the way healing happened.
Yeah. So I think it's worth remembering, maybe, I'm going to take this as a lesson, what you just said. Belonging and hatred never go together. If there's hatred, it's not belonging. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our culture got a lot of hatred in it, right? Mm-hmm. And I hate to say this because people think it's only on the other side, right? In this place, we tend to think hatred is the other people, right? The other party, the other faction. But there's just a lot of hatred in our country. And you make a mention, you quote Pablo, can I read Pablo Neruda's? So I'm going to shift this to sort of, so how do we discern? How do we know the difference between healthy, meaningful belonging and abusive, destructive, distorted belonging? You quote Pablo Neruda's, let's see if I can find it here. Thought I had this page. Let's see if I do have it or not. Sorry, just give me 1 second. So Pablo Neruda, on his receipt of the Nobel Prize, Kim quotes in this chapter, in chapter 4, he said, "All paths lead to the same goal, to convey to others what we are. And we must pass through solitude and difficulty, isolation and silence in order to reach forth to the enchanted place where we can dance our clumsy dance and sing our sorrowful song. But in this dance or in this song, there are fulfilled the most ancient rights of our conscience in the awareness of being human and of believing in a common destiny." Now, I read all that because it seems to me that the path he's saying to authentic belonging is an inner path, not just a social path. Do I have it right? I'm going to quote you in a minute, but I just want to start with him because it seems like that seems like a personal goal. He's talking about an inner path, not a relational one.
Well,
right?
I'd begin with he has it right.
Okay.
And I put that first. It's so beautiful. It's an honor to be able to share Pablo Neruda in one's own book, but it's there because yes, it's an individual path. We are all on individual paths, and when we look, for example, in the Fora of Human Rights, these are individual human rights, and yet I don't believe that it's written anywhere that someone needs to suffer all alone. I was once at a conversation that you were a part of many years ago, and it was about the purpose of suffering. And there were a lot of people there, but I remember interjecting, no, that suffering isn't for its own sake. Suffering is not for its own sake. And if that person that I'm talking about is sitting alone at the bottom of the well, they could be surrounded by hundreds of people, or they could be all alone at home and not have the courage to go out. But they feel like they're all alone out of all circles of concern. And in that headspace, I don't think there's many people that say this is a time for my positive growth, which is not to say that it doesn't happen through that. But I imagine that everyone here is familiar with Leonard Cohen. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I saw him, he was asked in an interview about was his ability to create beautiful, I think of him first as a poet, beautiful lyrics and be able to see the way he saw. Was that because of his experience with mental illness? And he said, no. That's because of my experience in spite of mental illness, words to that effect. And I think we have to be careful to name what someone else has to go through or suffer more than another. I think the emphasis should be much more on how we can be there without stifling the person or victimizing or course correcting for them. But I've never seen internal and external as separate.
Fascinating. So I'm going to selfishly shift. We have about 5 or 10 more minutes we'll talk, and then we'd love to engage as many of you as are willing and as many of you who feel belonging in this experience to join the conversation. Kim, we met a long time ago, but one of the things we've shared over the last 25 or so years is our shared love for the Special Olympics movement. And you write quite a lot in the book about specific Special Olympics athletes you've met and built relationships with. Special Olympics athletes tend to have experienced enormous amounts of isolation. And yet you write about Matthew Williams, you write about these people as archetypes of belonging, as heroes of belonging. Tell us how these athletes have moved or inspired or changed you.
We met 30 years ago.
Okay, I was going to say.
I'm bold enough to admit that. And I'm going to begin with that. We had already met when my dad had his brain injury. But do you remember that I came to see you in Washington, well, just mostly for the support of a friend, Tim and Linda Potter, his amazing wife, who I've put in my book. I've mentioned politics and prose, maybe not the way you want it. I mentioned that Linda and I spent a lot of time discussing this book, parked beside the dumpster, having a coffee. But we would purchase that inside, of course. But at any rate, I came to see you, and I wanted just to get some moral support, really. That's what I was looking for. At a really tough time. And I said, I think I'd like to get involved in Special Olympics, and it just was coming out of me in that moment. And so you started to talk to me about, well, I know your family is very involved in equestrian sports, and you love to ride horses, and would that interest you? And it came just like one of those flashes of light. No.
No, absolutely
well, yeah.
not. That's a good thing when you get a really clear answer, right?
But no, because I want to support families. I want to support families who learn at some point that their child has an intellectual or developmental disability. Why? Because if you aren't able to get that message to that family, if they don't have it already, that this is not a bad thing. This is like anything, filled with possibilities, what you make it. But going back to internal and external, if you're in a place where doctors are saying, as in some places they still don't know to say, tell them if the baby died, or put the child in an institution, which we still see in Serbia. Why? Because there's not enough money to put kids with an array of disabilities into home situations. Lots of money to go into an institution. For my dad, no money to put a man 65 years old, called sundown years, into rehabilitation. No, but all the care and money for him to go to a nursing home. So you can see became a pretty strong advocate. But it was about the families, and then the journey evolved, which was really because of getting to know the people you've mentioned and a lot of others, and really just by going to the games and seeing two things. One is that there's no anything here. There's no lack of anything here. Well, why is that? Because I know, and you know, and some of you know, that for people participating in Special Olympics, what happens off the field is what we're trying to model from what happens on the playing field and at these events. And so it's not always quite the same, understatement of the century. So I thought to myself that there's no victimhood here. There's no victimhood in my book, and now that I think about it, that's why. Because if you put someone a victim or leave them a victim, they will never get their power. And our job should be to support everyone in that quest. So
you have a lot of people nodding right now, going,
oh yeah,
because we've all. I mean, I just sorry for interrupting, but I think we're nodding because we've all felt that moment in which I may end up just dissolving into a victim. Like I just might be outside. I might never fit. And your invitation is, to write a book about people like Mandela, like Matthew Williams, like Loretta and others who have struggled, who have experienced the worst of humanity, but to be able to say, I've written this book and there's no victims in here.
Indeed,
It's quite
and
striking.
indeed, and even now, not the indeed about what I said in my book, but indeed about the point. Nelson Mandela said that unless the jailers are healed, those who jailed us, we can't be healed. It's in schools. We could all be the bully or the victim of bullying. You have to heal. You have to heal both in order to heal. But what I wanted to close your question on, because I think it's really important, is that I thought, well, this is again many now decades ago, when I was going to Special Olympics games, local and international and so on, I'd think, okay, well, so if this is not victimhood and there's no poor you here, that feels great. But so what am I then? What's my role in all this? Volunteering is great, but it's not about the lend a helping hand. What it's about is, I think all we want for each other is, you tell me who you are. I see you, I believe you, I will respect you for that. And we only ask for the same in return. So in all these years, when I still need mentors and supporters, the first people that I turn to are my friends. And when I lost my dad, and 8 years later my mother and sister in the same year, and I went, it's not even intentional. You kind of end up with the people who really get it, because at that point you don't really have the energy to meet new people who may get it. And it was friends like Loretta Claiborne and Matthew Williams and Krista Williams. And it wasn't that I had to explain anything. It was that I knew that they really got it, and that was from their own experience. And that's why they can be the advocates they are. So I just think it's just about taking our time to think about what is it that we value, and if we value belonging or other words that you might put in its place, then what are we doing about it?
What are we doing about it? Okay, so rapid fire, and then we'll open the floor. Rapid fire questions. Biggest surprise that you experienced in writing the book? Or
How isolating it was.
So all these books here, all these authors have all experienced isolation. It's actually kind of true, right? I mean, you probably hear this a lot from authors, right? The enormous isolation of writing. Okay.
We have one author who
I'm supposed to use the mic. Someone told me that.
yeah, thank you. I hate to be corrected by our speakers, but yeah, we have one author who, as a ritual, and he's written a number of books now, he lives nearby, but when he's done, he comes into the store once he's submitted his final manuscript, just to actually be with all these other authors on the shelves, so it's kind of a religious experience for him. So that's how he reconnects.
Isn't that beautiful? Did anything make you laugh in writing or in researching the book?
Well, and I put it in the book, remembering that even in the darkest times, and this is part of the shared belonging, things can be funny. And I remembered, I'll tell it super quick since you asked. My sister Tammy was 11 months younger than me, and she was one of the lights of my life. She had cancer. That's why she left us young. And I would accompany her to chemotherapy when she was fighting cancer. She was always fighting. And then toward the end, it was a palliative chemo. And one day we were walking down a long number of steps at Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto, where she was being treated. And I, by the way, I'm very squeamish, so squeamish. I can never look at a needle, and I'm sort of antsy in hospitals. And so I'm with my
needles are isolating.
No, needles are scary. But anyway, so Tammy's had IV with chemo all morning, and we're walking down the long steps of the hospital, and someone came up to us with outstretched arms and said, "It's okay, you're going to be okay." And he walked away, and my sister looked at me, and she says, "Always about you, sis." He'd come to help me because I looked ashen because of taking care of my sister. But there's a point in all this. She was my caregiver for my sister. That was her who was ill.
Beautiful. Biggest hope you have for the book? I mean, best-selling and all that stuff, but
It's not it's not about that. It just goes. Well, I mean, it just goes back to what I see my role is. I'm a passionate messenger of a powerful message. So in whatever I do, I just want to spread this message, and I hope that people will read my book, but not to say, "Oh, I agree with everything she said," to say, "Oh, maybe I could do this better," or maybe we're already doing this. And there's a lot of examples in the book of people already doing this, and a lot more that don't know that they're already doing this. So I'm just staying in that place of holding a space and doing my best to share a message.
beautiful. Can we have a little round of applause for our author today?
Thank you.
So I'm gonna, we'll open, there's a mic here, and we're asking folks if they do have questions, even though we're small, to use the mic so that we can capture your voices as part of the recording. And I'll open it up for questions for Kim, and if not, I have questions for individuals in the audience, so
Cool.
be careful if you leave too much quiet here in the opening minutes here. But the floor is open. Oh, go ahead, Novi, yep.
So Kim, I'm also
Maybe introduce yourself.
I'm Novi Craven. I'm
Novi.
also Tim's colleague. I'm also an athlete myself. And how did you want to be part of Special Olympics?
How do I want?
How did you want to be part?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, you know, I just wanted to be part, period. I tried my whole school life anyway to be part of a team. It's kind of a sore point. I never made a team, and I really just wanted to be part of a team. So with Special Olympics, I knew that I could actually, I wouldn't be the part that would help anybody to achieve the credo of let me win, but I was brave in the attempt. And I just, I guess beyond that, it's, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, it's really fun. I mean, it's just really fun, and I just don't always get that feeling of where you can just show up somewhere and you're just expected, in fact required, to be yourself. I hope that through getting to talk to people about the book that I can remind everyone that actually we're supposed to be doing that. So I guess that's a couple of reasons. I'm sure I have many more, yeah.
Beautiful. I want to welcome another author to the bookstore. Jeannie Shriver just slips in, but she has a new children's book out called All About Belonging, all about people working together. So welcome, Jeannie.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hopefully you'll have a function here soon. Next question. Yes.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I'm Kirsten Pickle. I'm a social worker, and belonging is such a wonderful word, so it's so important right now. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little more about the internal and the external being the same, and like the example of someone who felt, not isolated and seemingly an isolating experience, but then other people might feel isolated even when they're around, and the importance of like a community or culture.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for that. It's not to me that they're the same, because it's not the same experience or that same feeling, but it's a little bit like mythology. The person who wrote Mary Poppins, P.L. Travers, I think, talked about and wrote about mythology in a wonderful book, and she What the Bee Knows. and she talked about mythology in the same way that I want to talk about the internal and external. It was the only thing that she could really see where you could have two seemingly opposite, completely different things at either end of the same stick. And in that case, you might imagine, the beautiful queen, and then the evil vampire, and so on. And I go back to my childhood again. I was a very early reader, and I was also a very early lover of poetry. And I read the poems of William Blake, Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. And I think I go back to those now, and I think in some ways they saved, not that it needed saving, my childhood, but it helped to explain to me that there can be good and there's bad, and our job maybe isn't to try to only stop the bad, it's to know how to coexist and to hopefully be drawn mostly to the light. So when I think of the other side of what we're talking about, the other side of social connectedness and the other side of belonging, we're seeing lack of inclusion and isolation. Well, what's happening there is that whether it's the internal, the external that starts, I believe that they tend to seep one into the other. And if you're getting, for example, if you're a student who's being bullied, or a person or a teacher who's being bullied for that matter, and you don't feel the support of your peers, and you're in a situation where the administration is calling the shots, and you may not be able to feel that you're doing what you were called to do, or maybe you've been sent for combat training this fall, then you're not going to be able, I don't think, to feel internally whole and wonderful. And that's what I mean about looking at them together.
Beautiful. Megan.
Hey, Kim.
Hi, Megan.
So, you have a lot of diverse examples in the book, and I've been privileged enough to be at some of your convenings and symposia where you bring together a lot of different groups that are doing a lot of different things to address social isolation in different areas. And as someone working at Special Olympics, I've been able to learn from sometimes groups there that something they're doing gives me ideas about something that I could be doing. How do you best, what advice do you have, I guess, for people who might be working in different areas to learn and find those intersection points between different marginalized communities who might all be working towards the same goal?
Well, I mean, this could be my question to you, because that's what you do every day, Megan. But since it's to me this time, I think it begins with listening, and listening to people that are, whether it's at a workplace or wherever a group, to listen, and sometimes especially try to listen to the person who is standing at the back of a room. They may be saying, could you just please piss off because I need to make a phone call, but that may be the person who really just needs you as a bridge to bring them into another group. I would also say to really pay attention to the structures of where we are working and living, and where we engage, and to, I wouldn't say make sure they're all right. I would look at what's being fixed. If you have a structure, for example, that I'll give a Special Olympics example. Many years ago, at the time of the World Games in Ireland, you'll recall that Special Olympics had a seminar a couple of days before about attitudes and perceptions to people with intellectual disabilities, and there was a mom of a Special Olympics athlete from Botswana. And she and other mothers had formed a club for kids, and it happened to be was a group of boys. And she told us that several of the boys in this club at different points, but not just one boy and not 100-person club, had gotten really sick, and the nearest medical clinic was about a day's walk away. And each of them it was about 3, one was her son, had gone to the hospital, and each of them was told to go home. You're just a hysterical mother. You have a child with disabilities. Your child has a cold, and I hope I'm correct in saying that people with Down syndrome would have a higher risk of pneumonia. Anyway, a couple of those kids died, and it made me think about what a terrible system and structure that doesn't believe family, and how maybe we need other family members or people in that situation to go and advocate at healthcare providers and educate them too. So anyway, you know way more about this than me, but thank you for the question, Megan.
So I'm going to just mention one thing that, Megan, and relate your question. We talk in Special Olympics, you're hearing a lot of that here, about looking around the room, as you just mentioned, Kim, for people who are feeling isolated or outside the circle of belonging. I was talking to a teacher, a social emotional learning teacher, a couple of weeks ago, who said her question to people is to look around the room and ask who's not there.
Yeah.
Not just like who's isolated, who is there, but who's missing. And it's kind of an interesting additional question for convenings, social workers, community activists, social justice workers, to ask themselves, ask ourselves, like, not only who's like in the room who doesn't feel included, but who's actually not even in the room. Anyway, I think that's kind of interesting. Sean.
And just to add to that, when there are community gatherings of any, this is a community. In the UK, where I also live, in addition to Canada, where I'm from, there's something every year called the Great Get Together, and I think it's in other countries as well now. And it's basically a national picnic, and the idea is that in the street that you're on, that you would get together and have a picnic. And I always think about why doesn't this happen more often? But I especially think in that who's not here, because the people who show up, they already feel that they're part of community.
That's the tricky part. Sean.
Hey, Kim, it's great to see
Hi,
you.
Sean.
First and foremost, I just want to say how proud we all are from Special Olympics to have you part of our movement, former board member, maybe a board member again. We'll see. My name is Sean. I work with Novi and Megan and Marcy and Tim. Writing a book has to be an amazing process and a huge job. You're sitting next to a author. Did this author, Dr. Shriver, provide you any guidance or recommendations? No. And if he did, what was the best guidance you got from him? If not Tim, any other authors that helped you along the way? Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks,
making
Sean.
that open-ended, Sean.
Well, this author, I'm going to tell you about 2 authors. This author, Tim Shriver, every time I asked you a question, how would you handle this? Or the biggest thing, this for me anyway, was how to structure a book. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages. Now, how do you do this? This was always it from Tim. Oh, I don't know.
That's great advice. Now, if you're going to write a book, you know who not to call.
And
That's so
look, I
overwhelming.
really, really wish I could help you. And so I would usually go to Linda and say, well, I just went to Tim for advice, and this is what I got. She said, would you like a glass of wine? Yeah. But another writer that I want to tell you, it was the best advice I got at the outset, was Wendell Berry, who I know whose books are always here, and whose writing I love. And I got to interview him, and I got to go to his home in Kentucky. I write about it in the book as this is what I want my first day in heaven to be like, just like this. And it was amazing to get to interview him. And through that came the most important advice, I would say, not only for writing a book, but just for everything. Don't be prescriptive. Don't provide, so you don't tell people what to do. And in the book, I really avoided that. I just was determined to avoid this. And here's 10 easy things you can do, because I really believe people know what to do. We just need to sometimes see a light shone on that, and we need to be supportive of one another, but don't be prescriptive. In addition to, you see, but I knew Tim's books have done really well, so I thought the fact that he's
maybe he knew
doing
something,
that,
but apparently not.
yeah, maybe he knows something. Yeah.
So I know we've only got about 5 minutes left, but there's at least one veteran teacher in the room, and you've spoke about being a teacher. I'm wondering, Sharon, if you can share with us, or if you have thoughts on how we teach belonging, how we model, is there a curriculum, is there a style, is there a policy, is there a structure in education? So many people have their most isolating experiences as children.
Yeah.
And so many of those experiences are at school, right? And yet, those of us who count ourselves as educators spent so much time trying to figure out how to not let that happen. After more than 30 years, 48 years at one school nearby, 48 years, what's the lesson? How do we teach belonging better?
And probably if you would come to the microphone.
Yes, you have to come to the microphone. Sorry. I told you I was going to call on someone. She just didn't know it was her.
Thanks, Timmy. Well, of course, he was 10 when I knew him, and my husband and I were just sharing memories of things like driving to New York with Tim and 4 other sixth graders in the car, and I'm driving thinking, am I really doing this? But those kinds of things are like flashing through my head constantly. But the biggest thing the most important thing is that those people who are dealing with a classroom situation just need to be aware. It's not teaching the alphabet, counting the numbers, and doing all the educational things. Look at your environment. Look what you're dealing with. Watch what goes on the playground. Listen. Watch if somebody's doing one of these to somebody else. Teachers are so overworked now. They don't have time to deal with that. And I think it's a huge disaster for our world to just stop and think, what are these people going to be like? And they're sitting in front of a screen, or a 5-year-old on a computer, and that's not what day-to-day life is. It's interacting. It's memories of us at the mountain campus, and the kinds of interactions that make or break a person in the long run. So
Beautiful.
thanks,
Beautiful.
Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Miller. We just have a minute or two left. Are there any other questions before we invite Kim to give closing remarks? Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kelly, and I'm Novi's mom. And I just wanted to thank you both, because I did not realize that your father had a serious brain injury. And 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I had one. And I think it was through Special Olympics supporting Novi. And I grew up in North Carolina, and they would not take Novi's Medicaid when I adopted her. And I stayed here. And I've got to say, I think this is a wonderful area to be in, because today I'm being supported by, I came here and met Brianna Scurry, and they told me that I was being kept safe at Georgetown Hospital, and there's so many places here that really, they gave Novi her vaccines the very first day they came out. And we had ours 2 weeks ago when they brought it. So I just thank you all for all you do.
Beautiful. Hard to improve on those beautiful remarks. So thank you for your vulnerability and your openness in making us feel a sense of belonging. There is, Sharon said pay attention, and you mentioned pay attention when the elbows are out and stuff like that. But at least we should also pay attention when there's beautiful things being given to us by each other, by doctors, by nurses, by children. Because sometimes the key to belonging is noticing how hungry each of us is to feel it, and how ready people who may seem like they're behind a wall, how ready they are to break the wall down and reach out. So thank you very much for your beautiful remarks. Kim, the last word is yours.
Well, to thank everybody for coming, and thank you to Tim for doing an excellent job. And I'm glad I was able to put on the record how long we've known each other. And also, how long we've known each other means that we're both turning 63 this fall. And I think that that's very important in terms of stamping out another ism that I don't care for, which is ageism. I just hope that that there can be, well, there won't be a gathering that in a way means as much to me as this one, because when I lived around the corner on Ellicott Street Northwest with my daughter Caitlin, who's now 30, she was about 3 at the time, and we came over here almost every day. I really thought, one day, and this is that day. But also, when we talk about what it is in a classroom, in a community like Special Olympics, what it is to feel that belonging, it's just a feeling of being at home. It's a feeling that we all know. I mean, I try to avoid explaining it if I don't have to, because I think we all know it. And so I want to close on the point so we all know what it is when we don't have it. And I think that that it shouldn't be as much work as it is today, but it is that much work. But I'll also say that it's totally worth it, and especially to be there for others that are more in feeling that they're inside the well than not. And well, really just to express gratitude. And thank you for having me to your bookstore today.
Let's hear it for Kim Samuel.
Well, thank you, Kim and Tim. That was a very inspiring talk. There's a lot more in the book.